Hey everyone, welcome to the channel. All things Middle Earth here with a quick video ranking every single set effect in the game. We've done lots of videos and tier lists looking at which damage commanders are best, which gear is best for them. So now if you've looked at that, you want to start looking at the sets, you have to see what you can actually build for those commanders to kind of complete the whole thing. So we're going to rank all of these coming up in just 1 second. And the finished tier list, this complete tier list with all these effects on it, will be in the description as always, along with the top-up link for the channel. If you use it, does support the channel. It actually can save you some money. You don't have to deal with some of the Apple fees if you use Apple, or if you're in different regions, it's cheaper as well. So definitely check it out. See if you can save yourself some money and support the channel. It's a win-win. But let's go ahead and get into the tier list. All right, starting out, we're going to rank these from least to best, working our way from the dustbin up to the Balrog tier. Now, again, just to make it clear, if I haven't already, these are for damage dealing commanders. I very much believe they're the meta right now. Again, paired with support commanders, we'll talk a lot about it. If that changes, if they update things, I will for sure pin comments down below and make sure that that news is out there so you're not using outdated information. But right now, having good damage commanders is the way to go. So jumping in, number one in the dustbin, very obviously, hopefully, is the Siege Ladder effect. Now, Siege Ladder is for sieging, which is not something damage commanders do. So this is not an effect you want to use on your commanders unless you're building a siege formation, in which case you can just use green gear to do that and save yourself the gold for something else for strengthening. But that's our first dustbin. Next up is going to be Upkeep. Now, again, you could probably put this in this order. It doesn't really matter. Upkeep right now is not very good. Healing is not very good in the game. And if you're a damage dealing commander, you're not really healing either. Something that could change with Upkeep in the future is that they have said they want to address how healing works in the game, and they want to modify healing by some commander stats so it is more effective. So there could be situations where there are hybrid commanders who do damage and heal who could use this as a second best option and do okay with it. But it's a pretty small percent increase to the recovery received, so I don't think it's going to be worth using, but it's worth noting that this could potentially change down the road. Next up in the C tier is Power Overwhelming. Now this gives you a negative damage received when you're affected by stun and madness, which can help. And again, if it's this or nothing, it's fine. That's kind of where we're in the C territory. It's like if you can make it and still run the best stuff you have, sure. But I do find that stun and madness are a lot fewer and far between in 2.0. So I don't think it's one worth chasing at all. And again, unless you have nothing else, I wouldn't mess with it personally. Next up in the C tier is going to be Thick Armor. Now, Thick Armor gives you plus 20% armor for your formation, which can be useful. And again, we're just in that territory. If it doesn't really affect the commanders that are doing damage, there are uses for it on other types of commanders, support commanders, which we're not talking about today. But for damage commanders, there just isn't going to be a use. But again, if I had it and nothing else, I would run it. And I'd run it before Power Overwhelming personally. But that is the Thick Armor set. Next up in the B tier is going to be Agility. Now, Agility doesn't really directly affect anything the commanders do, but it does give you more initiative, which can mean that you can have less stuff stolen from you if you're dealing with a Sauron who puts out Madness, for example, and going first in mirror matchups. This can play a big part. There's probably an argument to say that you could put this higher, because if you are fighting the exact same commanders, if you ran all agility sets, you would go first and ideally do better, but it doesn't directly affect them. And I've not seen it too much in the mirror matches. It does seem like people push more for the damage. So let me know what you guys think about this, if it should be ranked higher. Definitely a decent working into that range where, you know, this is a pretty clear difference from the ones down here, but still not one that I would go out of my way to get. Next up is Evasive Action. This is going to reduce damage received in the first 3 rounds, which is good. And just overall damage reduction starts to just be that kind of like general use, like all-purpose good effect. So doesn't really do anything for them, but more troops being alive, just it's not a bad thing. So this is one that I like. You could probably argue that as well, so don't get hung up on it. But Evasive Action is a very solid, I think, can be used on any one type of set effect if you can't make the ones that they actually are looking for. Next, we have Divide and Conquer. Divide and Conquer reduces damage received by 2% every round. So if you go in a long battle, this reduction gets actually pretty significant. But if it's a quick battle, if it's a commander you're going against who does damage early, it's not as effective. So it can be more or less effective depending on the match you're in. So again, you could argue that this ranks lower because it's sort of situational, but there would definitely be times where in long battles that people do damage more in the late rounds. This could be a lot more effective for your team to kind of get away from a lot of that damage. Next up is Forward 2. This is negative 10% damage received from physical damage from enemy commanders' armies or their formations. So again, with the meta being so much about damage commanders, this is very helpful. Although obviously if it's just physical damage, it doesn't do anything against your elemental damage dealers. So this could be very hit or miss, where if you run into Dane and Beorin, 10% the whole time is a pretty significant chunk. But if you hit Staro and Skullhelm in a formation, it's essentially useless. So also one you could probably argue position about, but the 10% across the board for physical, which seems to be the best in the game, is I think a very good one to bank on. Next up, and the last one to close out the B tier, is going to be Flay. This is our first red set effect. You'll notice that the blue ones are more defensive, reducing damage, that kind of stuff, and the red ones are more offensive, dealing extra damage. This one is Flay. It deals more damage, or it ignores a certain percent of defense. Again, focus damage already ignores defense, so if you're using all focus damage, this one is not as, it doesn't pertain to that. But if you're using physical damage, I think it can be nice. I've not heard people loving it personally, so I think it's going to sit in the B tier. But again, depending on what you're running, physical or elemental, it could have a decent effect, or it could have no effect at all. So not one I'd chase by any means, but I think it's a solid, and it's an offensive set, which I think is nice to kind of look at what your commanders do and try and enhance that. Next up in the A tier is going to be Sharp Blade. It's going to give plus 20 attack to the formation. It's not a percent-based thing, but it's just a solid increase in attack. I think depending on the gear you have, this can be a lot better or a lot worse, because if you're using purple gear, for example, and you're watching this, I think the plus 20 can be more significant. But with gold gear fully strengthened out, the actual 20 by itself is not as good as looking for a percent-based effect, if that makes sense. So definitely depends on what you're using, but I think it's just a very solid overall increase that's offensive and goes with what they do. Next up is going to be Warcry. This is a percent damage increase, but it's for the first 3 rounds. That's why it's in the A tier. If you're using commanders who do more damage in the early rounds, like Shadow's a great example, this is a fantastic one for him. But other commanders, if they're very late round, or at least the longer they go, the more they do, it's not quite as good. So it could definitely be Balrog tier, depending on who you use, but it's just that first 3 rounds increased damage, which again can be very, very nice, but also can be sort of limiting. The next one up in the A tier as well is Perseverance, sort of the opposite of Warcry. It is 2% damage increase every round, so it'll get up to 20% damage increase. So if you're using commanders who like to draw out and go a lot longer, do late round or late match damage, this one can be very good as well. So they're kind of mirror in terms of when they do their damage, but I think could have different success depending on the commanders you use. So a very good one that I like a lot on certain commanders, but if you're using someone who wants to do a lot of early damage, it may not be as good. All right, last 2 here in the Balrog tier. First up, we have Might. It is a 10% increase to physical damage, and I'm just going to bring the next one up. They are the exact same, just for physical and elemental. This is Lore of the Arcane right here. It is 10% increase for your elemental damage, your burn, focus, and poison. It's just across the board. It's percent based, so it's very good, especially the better your gear gets. Percent based is better because it's increasing more stats that you have, whereas the lower stats you have, you might look to more like just numerical increase as opposed to percent based. But these are all the set effects in the game. Again, if you've got one in the first 2 tiers with a gold gear on your damage commanders, you're going to do really, really good. I have one of these. I have Perseverance personally. It's pretty hard to make sets. So what I've said in all the videos is don't go out of your way to make sets if it's going to break up your kind of best gear you're using. Even if it's the best gear in the game, it's not worth running Might to run the 6th best weapon in the game, for example. So you want to make sets if you can. They're kind of the cherry on top, but not worth breaking up best in slot gear pieces. So again, all this stuff's on the channel. Hopefully you guys have seen it. There's lots of tier lists out there. So if you haven't had a lot of success and you just want a quick reference, you don't want to do spreadsheets or sorting numerically, you can just look at these things and kind of look through your account, try and put the best options in there. If you can make a set with some of these top options, even A through B, it's going to help. But at the end of the day, using the best in slot is usually better in my opinion. So let me know what you guys think. Again, comment down below too if I messed this up, if you guys think it's wrong. I think, again, we're kind of working at the offense of the red ones at top, which makes sense. But there could be some that are up for debate depending on what you run into or what you've seen. So let me know down below. And as always, I'll see you guys in a future video.